right, welcome to Livin in the 8-3. My name is Darren Douglas, and we are coming at you from the Terrapin Podcast Network in Spearfish, South Dakota. We are capturing this podcast at the Terrapin Podcast Studio at 132 West Hudson. Livin in the 8-3 is a podcast about the stories of Spearfish, and today my guest is Wayne Mundt from Spearfish. How you doing, Wayne?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Darren. Thanks for letting an old man come down here.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be fun. So like I was telling you before, what we're doing here is I like to have some guys in that I've met over the years. I hear all these stories and stuff, and I wanted to get some of those on the record a little bit. And
Yeah, some of them you probably don't want to hear, but
yeah, some of them I don't want to hear, and then that's why we got a few things. Maybe we'll get to that point.
we might
Yeah.
a little later on.
A little later on. So I guess first thing, tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, family, where you're from, and how you ended up in Spearfish, like your first day in Spearfish.
Obviously, my name's Wayne Mundt, Wayne R. Mundt on my check blanks, and I came to Spearfish quite a long time ago. I'm a Nebraska native. I graduated from high school in Grand Island, Nebraska, where I had a pretty successful career in athletics, did okay academics, and never took a book home, and graduated in the top 5% of a class of 320 kids.
Well, I never took a book home, but I wasn't in the top 5%.
Well, it turned out good. I must have had easy classes. Anyway, I went to Kearney, Nebraska my first year out of college, and ran track for them down there. And that was kind of an uneventful thing for me. The coach at that time, Charlie Foster was his name. He was the coach of the U.S. Olympic team, actually. Let's see, I went to college. I graduated from high school in 1962. So in 1964, he was one of the Olympic track coaches. And he was an amazing man. And we had some real good athletes, and I was kind of an also-ran at that point. And I came from a background of no money, literally, and lived on the east side of town, which was the bad side of town. If there is a bad side in Grand Island, there certainly is nowadays. And I was out there at that point, grew up with a lot of, I was a minority in amongst the minorities. But I didn't mind it at all. I had great neighbors, good kids, that sort of thing.
So Grand Island, our family grew up close to that in that area around Clarks, Nebraska.
Yeah, your dad and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
Your dad lived just a short ways east of where I grew up.
Yeah, it's a small world. You run into people.
It is.
It's amazing when you get out there.
Your dad and I have talked about that a lot of times. In fact, we're both Nebraska fans, which we need to eat a lot of crow over the last few years. And Patty and I went to Ireland this fall to watch Nebraska play Northwestern.
Oh, really?
And I bought and brought back a cap for your dad.
Oh, yeah. He told me that.
Yeah, because I knew he loved those Cornhuskers.
Oh, yeah.
A Cornhusker room out at his house out there.
Oh, yeah. Yep. We watch a lot of the games out there anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, I'd gone to college and then ran out of money. I had a few scholarships going to school, so my first year was pretty much paid for. But back then it was like $500 a semester. And after the end of that year, I was out of money, and of course couldn't rely on the family for any money just because we didn't have it. So I took a year off to gain some resources, shall we say, so I could go back to college. And it was that spring, the next spring, 1964, on Good Friday, I decided, I told one of the guys that I was working with that I wanted to come up to the Black Hills and visit my grandmother who lived in Rapid City. And my older brother, Don, had also dropped out of college, and he'd moved to Rapid City to work for my uncles who had Risk Brothers Millwork in Rapid City. So I'm talking to my friend. His name was Dietz. Dietrich was his last name, so we called him Dietz. He said, well, my neighbor just died, and his wife doesn't drive. They've got a car. She's probably going to have to sell it. So Dietz and I got a little courage. We went out and had a couple of beers, went over and talked to this nice little old lady. And I said to her, I wanted to go up and see my grandma in the Black Hills for Easter weekend. And I understand you have a car you might be interested in selling. She said, well, you know, my husband died and I don't drive, so the car's not going to do us any good. Um, I'd like to sell it. It's old, but it must be worth something. And I said, well, yeah, like what? She said, can you give me $25 for it? And so I did.
$25.
$25. I bought a 1946 Chevrolet Master sedan two-door.
And then jumped in it and headed for the Black Hills.
Well, it wasn't quite that easy. On Thursday morning, I went over and I paid her the money. And Thursday during the day, I went out and there was a little gas station about 4 blocks from my house. I went down there, and my dad used to trade there, and I'd be with him every now and then. And so the guy that ran the gas station kind of knew me, and I went down to the gas station and I told him what my plan was. I'd bought this old car, which I was driving by then, and I told him I thought I needed a 5-gallon can that I could fill with water and a 5-gallon can, and asked him if I could buy some used oil just in case it started burning oil. So he gave me 2 cans, filled one up with water and filled one up with used oil, and didn't cost me any money. So I put those in the trunk. And I went home and was visiting with my mom about my good fortune, and told her I was headed out in the morning and I was going to head to the Black Hills. So I packed up a few pair of jeans and T-shirts and whatever else. In those days, I never had a suitcase, so I put it in a cardboard box, put it in the back seat, and I had the gas and the water in the trunk. Headed for the Black Hills in that old car, and certainly made it. And it was really a good time. That day was the day of the Alaskan earthquake, and was a 9.2 event that happened in Alaska outside of Anchorage, and it was a huge earthquake.
So how do you hear about that earthquake when you're driving AM radio?
No, I didn't hear about that at all. I heard about it after I got to Rapid City, and I went over and my Uncle Roy, who was one of my mother's 2 brothers in Rapid, and I talked to him, and I was so happy I was up here in the Black Hills, because we had come up a few times as a child, and went around in the hills and found sandstone, and I made an ashtray for my dad one time, ground it. It took me all day to grind a little bowl in it, that sort of thing. But my Uncle Roy said, did you feel the earthquake? And I didn't feel anything. My tires were wobbling. That's about all. But he had told me about this Alaskan earthquake. Well, it turned out it was a devastating earthquake. And that was probably about the time I crossed the border into South Dakota. Anyway, that night, Friday night, my brother Don was working a couple of jobs in Rapid City, and he was working as a bartender at this 3-2 beer joint called Taco Time. Taco Time.
Yeah.
Sitting right, it got eliminated during the Rapid City flood. It went downstream.
Somebody needs to reopen Taco Time in Rapid City.
It was the place. It was huge. It'd be packed. They had a doorman, and my brother Don was serving beer. And I got to talking to some people in there, and they said, you ought to, if you like fun, you ought to go to Spearfish tomorrow night at the Park Pavilion. Is a good band coming in. I can't remember. It was one of those, in the old days, rock and roll bands came through Spearfish like water through a sieve. They were here every Friday and Saturday night.
I've read those stories about being down to the park.
Yeah,
at the
Dion the
Pavilion.
Belmonts. All those guys came through Spearfish and played at the Park Pavilion.
Yeah, Gary Miller tells lots of awesome stories about.
Oh my goodness, yeah, and he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the state of South Dakota's Gary Miller.
He just got into the Grand Ole Opry. They just asked him in the other night. I saw
Gary
him.
Mule Deer. Yeah, he's one of our own. He's a few years older, has a lot more hair than I do. So on Saturday night, I thought, well, I can't go wrong. These people hanging around a 3-2 beer joint. they're all pretty smart. It seemed to me, I'm 20 years old. And at that time, you could drink a beer in South Dakota, 3-2 as it was. In Nebraska, it was a dry state. You couldn't buy a drink unless you belonged to a club. They had Legion Club, Elks Club, that sort of thing. So
Sure.
drinking by the drink was not happening in Nebraska. So when I got to South Dakota and I could walk in and buy a beer, I thought it was a pretty good deal.
And you would be 18 at that point.
I was 20 at
20.
that time. I'd already gone to college and stayed out a while.
Okay.
So I come to Spearfish, South Dakota, a town that I had never heard of, the Spearfish Park Pavilion, a place that I had never heard of, and probably had a $2 six-pack of beer in my 1946 Chevy and went in, paid my cover charge. In those days, probably only a couple of bucks. And the place was wall-to-wall people, just jammed with people. It was, and I thought, man, pretty much right now I'm liking this place. And I got to talking to some people, and they said there was a college here, and I knew ultimately I needed to have a degree to be successful in life, or at least I thought I did. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. And that evening turned out to be somewhat eventful. There was, I had to ask somebody where the men's room was. Went to the men's room, and they had one of those long, kind of a trough-like deal where the water runs in it, cigarette butts and chewing gum and spit and all the other stuff going on. Anyway, the fellow next to me said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Nebraska." And he said, "We don't like Nebraska people." And I said to him, I said, "Well, geez, you're missing out on all. I'm really kind of a nice guy, you should get to know me." He said, "I don't think I'm going to get to know you at all. In fact, I'm going to take you out in the parking lot and kick your butt." And I said to him, "Well," I said,
Welcome to town.
that ain't going to happen." And I thought, well, gee whiz, this place may not be as good as I thought. Well, it turned out pretty good for me right thereafter. And I decided I really like Spearfish. Right now I'm 1-0. I'm undefeated.
1-0.
I'm 1-0.
Word's going to travel.
It's going to travel. I'm going to stay in this town for a while, I think. So got to dancing and got to meet some people, and there was just something about this whole area that I really liked. Ended up going back to Rapid City that night and talked to my brother about it. He'd never been to Spearfish. And I said, "This place is really cool." So that was my introduction to town. It come kind of left-handed, had to earn my keep that night, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that turned out all right.
Yeah. Well, that's a good story, as good as any story, I suppose, as far as coming to town, and it ended well.
It ended very well for me.
So did you from there? Did you decide to enroll in the university, or
I
did you start working
back then.
first?
It was Black Hills Teachers College at that time, and I thought I would really like to go here, but I had made a commitment to my mother that I'd go back to college one more semester. So I went back to Kearney, Nebraska for another semester, and I got down there. The flat land, people were great. I've had great friends my whole life. People were good. The university was good, but there was something that was missing, and what was missing was the Black Hills. There was when I got here that day, Good Friday, there was something about the hills that just seemed reverent, sacred, whatever. I don't know what the term would be, but I felt at home, although I'd never been here as an adult. And so I went back to Kearney and stayed a semester, and I went still driving that 46 Chevy. And I went home and I explained to my mother that I had a calling to come north. And so I packed 2 boxes. Still didn't have a suitcase. So I had two cardboard boxes of T-shirts and jeans and stuff. So I headed to the Black Hills, moved to Rapid City, found gainful employment down there, laboring, worked at the cement plant. and I knew that was not going to be my calling for life.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to head to the hills. I'm going to move to Spearfish. And so I did. Haven't hardly looked back. I enrolled at Black Hills State.
I was gonna say, where was your first? Did you live in the dorms? Where was your first?
Nope, I
place
never
you
did,
lived?
because by then I was 21 years old
Okay.
and had college experience. I was out of high school 2.5 years, I think, something like that. And come up here and I got some financial aid, which Black Hills State has been known for from the time I came here until today. There's a lot of students that get a lot of aid here.
Yep.
And but for that aid, I would not have been able to go to school because I didn't come from resources in the family and that sort of thing. But I enrolled here and went out for football that first year. I thought I was ineligible, but I could have played. I didn't really realize that. So I played in the back in those days it was called the green and gold game.
Sure.
Or no, it was the purple and gold.
Okay.
Back
Yeah.
then
Purple,
I was still purple and gold. So I played on, I can't remember if it was the purple or the gold side. And Coach Dale Hardy, we'd been working out for a couple of weeks, and he said, "What do you play?" And I said, "I can play tight end. I can play halfback or maybe defense." He said, "Okay, I'm going to put you at safety." And so I got 9 tackles in that game and 1 interception and a headache. Bill Holbert hit me head on. I had a headache for a day and a half after that game.
Yeah.
But it was a good time. And then later that year, I went out for track and I lettered in track at the university. Back then, it was still the college. So that kind of got me introduced on the athletic side way back then. In fact, I had the record for the 440 intermediate hurdles for about 2 hours one day. The conference championship was at Rapid City, and I broke the school record in the prelims. And a fellow from Sundance, Wyoming, won the finals. He set the record. I got 5th in the finals. I fell down, got up, still made it. Got 5th in the finals at the conference meet, but a guy by the name of Bill Pickard set the school record.
Running for BH also.
Running for BH later that day. Yeah, nice. I met a lot of guys that I've kept in touch with over the years that are scattered out everywhere from my 1 year running track at BH. It was.
I think BH has had a solid track program for many, many, many years. Obviously.
Yeah, we won the conference championship and got 4th in the NAIA the only year that I ran track and scored in both those meets. And then after that, I decided to enjoy college a little more. I had to work, didn't have sources of income.
Sure.
And my $500 a semester was running short real quick.
Jeez, that was big money there. Now.
Big money.
So, all right, we flash back to that time. You're living here in Spearfish. Where does Wayne Mundt go to get a hamburger?
Back in those days, it was really cool. There was it was called the Polka Dots, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just up the road from where we sit now. And there was a place right by the creek, right across from Taco John's. It was called Bimbo's.
Yeah.
And you could get a hamburger for 15 cents, fries for a dime, and I don't remember what a malt cost, but they were homemade malts back in those days, probably a quarter.
Sure.
But a 15-cent hamburger, there was a lot of Bimbo's hamburgers past my gullet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They kept you alive, I'm sure. So where does a guy go to get a beer then when you wanted to get a beer?
Well, back in those days, we used to make a run over to Bighorn, Wyoming. Bighorn, Wyoming was on Highway 14. You had to go through Deadwood Lead over O'Neill Pass that way to into Bighorn, Wyoming. You could get a case of beer for $4. It was called Bighorn beer. It was horrible, absolutely horrible.
Buckhorn. There's Buckhorn.
Or Buckhorn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It was Buckhorn. Yep. Yeah, Buckhorn beer. You get a case of beer for $4, and then it was all warm. And we put some in the wintertime, we'd put a few beers in behind the grill of the car and drive a few miles, and that forced air would run past them and chill them right down. Yep. So they would, and then there was Campus Inn was downtown, and B&B was always a staple. The first cocktail I ever bought in Spearfish, other than drinking out of my car, was at the B&B bar.
Yeah.
And it was the place. I mean, it's the ambiance is still the same.
Yeah.
As it was back in 1965.
I've had a few beers in that place in my day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I imagine that it's, who owned it back then? Do you have any idea?
Glenn Hitson was the owner
okay.
back then. He had just purchased it. I met the guy who owned it before Glenn. His name was Ambrose Friel, called Amby. He had a brother named Oswald. It was Amby and Ozzy, and they were twins. And Amby lived next door to the Dunwoody house, a couple blocks to the east of us, so over there. And Amby Friel was he might have been 5'6", 160 pounds, and he might have been the toughest guy in West River, South Dakota. I went over to see him one time just because I'd heard how tough he was, and he had kept a scrapbook of his days. He used to travel with a circus and a carnival, and he would fight in the summer. Come one, come all. And if you could last a 3-minute or a 5-minute round, I can't remember exactly what it was, with him, then you got a certain monetary prize, $10, $15. But he knocked everybody out.
Yeah. Oh, man.
He had a.
It's a good skill to have if you own a bar such as the B&B.
Yeah. Well, he was quite the guy, but he was little. He was 5'6", 160, and fighting these guys that are 250, 300 pounds. And he had, it wasn't just tales. He had the scrapbook there to show those pictures. Yeah. It was interesting.
Huh. Okay, so then you meet a nice lady that you want to take out for a nice meal. Where do you go in Spearfish at that?
Back then, Margie's Steakhouse was the only place.
And this would have been
1965 through.
I went to Margie's as a kid, so I know that it lasted quite a while.
Through the time up until I got drafted. In fact, I got engaged in the parking lot to my wife. I've been married for, this is a trick question, 54 years. And we got engaged in the parking lot and then took her inside and had a salad. They had the greatest salad plates that come out. It had all kinds of.
I know this is going to be a reoccurring theme in these podcasts with people, is the salad trays at Margie's.
It was absolutely wonderful. They had like 3-4 kinds of cheese and peppers and pickles and all kinds of things.
I have beers with your boys, and we'll eventually get to Margie's and get to those trays.
Yeah, and it was really, really a fun place. And that's where you go, and we'd go out and have a hamburger steak. I think you could have a hamburger steak and a salad and that salad plate and a potato for $3.50 back then.
Yeah.
And even I could afford that. I was tending bar in different places, and my tip money went to social money.
Sure.
So it was a great. Margie's was just a spectacular. The Ainsworth family had it forever.
Yeah. Yes, it was a
good people and a great
staple
great place.
Town, yeah. Now, okay, one more of these little questions like this. You're a big hunter and stuff like that. So where was your go-to place in the hills back then? I imagine you like to go up and play in the hills.
I shot my very first deer in Spearfish, west of town, out by Crow Peak, and I had went with a guy that had a Volkswagen Bug and a 308 Army rifle that he had sporterized, and we went out and we each shot a 2-point mule deer. We cut the legs off at the knee, on the front, the back, gutted them. And the head really didn't mean a lot, but we knew we had to take it. So we cut the head off, and we put both deer in the back seat of that VW Bug and hauled them back to town.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So that was my beginning into the.
Did you have to have a tag for back
We
then?
did.
You'd
Yeah,
have to,
but you can buy it over the counter. You
Yeah.
know, we bought them. I think I bought mine at the hardware store downtown, which was Matson's Hardware, where Sears is nowadays.
Yeah.
Used to be Matson's Hardware. Went in there,
We,
probably $5 license.
we used to, we could still do that when I was in high school. We could go in and
Yeah, just go
and
get a
buy 'em,
license, go hunt.
over at Minuteman or
Yeah, yeah. Minuteman didn't exist way
I
back
don't know
in those days.
what was it called? Well, when I was not when you were going. No, it would have been. I remember
It
that
was
hardware store.
it was it common? Not Common Sense. There was another name for the Mini Mart.
Mini Mart, yeah,
Mini
right
Mart.
down here on the corner.
Yeah, yeah, Mini Mart.
Yeah, and then right where that bank next to Mini Mart is, there used to be a strip, like a bunch of offices right in there.
Yeah.
Strip mall
Harvey
office.
Crouchen owned that
Yeah.
building, and it had a parking lot underneath. In fact, one of my boys got arrested. Luke, imagine that.
No.
And it was raining outside, and he was skateboarding with two other guys.
Inside there.
And they skated into there, and one of our local gendarmes pulled in there with his lights on and said, "You guys are under arrest.
You skateboarding?
You skateboarding freaks. It says no skateboards, no bicycles, no rollerblades. Did you see the sign?" And my son Luke says, "Yeah, but you know, it's raining outside." The guy said, "I'm taking you in." And I absolutely know who the policeman was, but I'm not going to say it. He's retired now, thank you. And Luke, who at the time was probably 15, 16 maybe, he said, "Can I talk to you like man to man instead of like cop to kid?" The guy says, "Yeah." So Luke says, "If your family, one of your boys had pulled in here skateboarding, would you arrest him?" And he said, "Heck no." And Luke said, "Then why are you arresting me?" He said, "Because I can." So anyway, Luke got, and this is the gospel truth, Luke got a 30-day suspended sentence for skateboarding in that building in those days.
Boy, things have changed. Huh?
Yeah.
If we could only get them, if skateboarding was the only thing that we could.
Yeah.
Worry
I mean,
about.
they weren't doing anything else, just getting out of the rain. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's another story.
Well, that's why we do this, right? Those stories
Yeah.
kind of come out, and
Well, I have 4 sons, and I'm very proud of all of them. Eric, my oldest, then Nick, and then Zach, and then Luke. And the Mundt boys, there's 11 years between the first and the last.
yeah.
And I've just had so much joy again in Spearfish. Everything from soccer to basketball. And Eric, of course, was an All-American track athlete, and
Mm-hmm.
they played football and they wrestled.
So yeah, well, that was going to be my next topic of with you would be soccer in Spearfish, because I grew up with Nick, your second oldest. Him and I were the same age.
Yep.
And I don't know if soccer started then in Spearfish, but it was
that's when it started.
It was really early.
Ronnie
early on.
Tice
Yeah.
was working at the university, and his son Eric Tice and Nick Mundt
And Eric was an RA, yeah.
and Eric Locan and a whole bunch of guys, same age. In fact, they all had like page boy haircuts, and they're all
They're all pretty boys. You're exactly
all pretty
right.
boys, all 6 and 7 year olds,
All
and they
of
all
you.
looked the same. They all had these little you couldn't tell whose kid is whose. In fact, Patty and I were sitting on the sideline watching, and Nick's team, Ronnie Tice is the coach. They're heading down toward the west end where they're going to try to kick a goal. And so they're all moving that way. And Mateau, standing high, who was in that same class, he is running up the far side on the north, headed to the west. And he stops and he looks down and he hollers, "Nick, over here, ant pile." And so Nick and 2 of the other kids peeled off from this scoring attempt to go look at the ant pile.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I remember out there playing Blue Jeans. I mean, it was
Yeah.
one vivid memory. Well, couple of vivid memories. One of them is, remember, the boys played with the girls. Michelle Wyka and Sharice Whitlock would work us up and down the soccer
very
field.
good athletes.
Yeah, very good athletes.
Yep.
And then I remember being at the soccer fields were up at the science building at the college there by that big field by it's a lot of parking lot now.
Yeah.
And we're having practice one day and or games maybe on a Saturday, and the volunteer fire whistle went off. And I remember turning around and all the coaches just took off running for their trucks. And it was like, soccer's over. And it was like everybody that was there was a volunteer fireman, and it was their game on, so.
Yeah.
We jumped in the truck and went to the fire. And I mean, we were sitting in the truck watching the fire as kids in our unis.
I was a fireman for 9 years with the volunteer fire department. And it was really, it was a love of wanting to help the community.
Yeah, it was.
I was on the department when I got into the department the day before the big Homestake Mill fire.
Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't go to the fire that night. One of the firemen and somebody from the mill were killed.
Where was that at?
That was the Homestake Sawmill, is where Pope and Talbot is now.
Oh, okay.
And it burned to the ground. It was a huge fire.
Okay.
And we lost a fireman and one of the workers.
Remember what year that was?
Yeah. That would have been around 1978. 70,
somewhere in there.
78, I think, because I'd purchased the house and I had my 3 boys with me, and my wife had gone back to the University of South Dakota to get her master's in special education. So I was out there with the 3 boys. That was quite the summer, actually.
I bet it was. Knowing your 3-4 boys,
Oh boy,
I'm sure it was.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, they were a handful, but fun.
So when you started soccer, I mean, soccer has really turned into something in this town.
It's
and
amazing.
So this would have been the early '80s when this was going down.
Yep.
How far did we travel? I'm trying to remember. Now they go Denver, they go all these places, but we probably had to define soccer. We probably had to travel a little bit.
At that time there was no support from the school system or the city or anything. It was all parental.
Yeah.
We threw in money. We bought shirts and shorts. Finally, we were very fortunate. Nick's class won a state championship. I believe it was in Sioux Falls. We had gone down there.
I remember.
David Diker got knocked out in one game. Got just knocked stone cold.
I remember that.
Yeah, they won. And then Zach's team, they were very good. These are my boys. They won a state championship soccer match, and this was before it became school sports.
Sure. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I remember those days and running around out there and getting to compete. I like to compete. Now, when we didn't have football in Spearfish until you were in junior high. So then when football started in junior high, my soccer career was over. But I played up until.
Yeah. Well, you did really well at football. And
it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun.
Not trying to feather his nest, but this guy could hit a ball, softball, hardball, or whatever, from here to the next zip code out of the park.
Close your eyes and swing hard. That's how that went.
But you connected on a lot of them.
Works. So we've talked about your sons here a little bit. So let's kind of go over your boys. First of all, we should throw so much credit to your wife.
Oh yeah, she's still there. She's still my wife, 54 years.
Yeah, and raising 4 boys.
Yep, and I did a lot of traveling after they got up, into school and stuff like that. I went into the oil business, and there's not much oil produced right around Spearfish, so I traveled a lot from North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, all over the country, and I'd come home every other weekend for a week. And I know that put a lot of pressure on her and the kids too, but somehow I got to make most of their games, whether it be basketball, football, track, or whatever.
Yeah, I was, so my oldest daughter, she's 20 now, and when she was in junior high track, middle school track, they had a meet down in Rapid City, so I went down. You know how track meets are. It's like throwing a dart when your kid's going to compete. So
yeah,
I'm sitting there, lawn chair, having a nice afternoon, and I hear the announcer, and he goes, he's reading off meet records, and he goes, the meet record in the 400 is held by Eric Mundt from Spearfish in like 1980 or something like that. I was like, oh my God.
1980,
I was like, Eric still
1986
holds that
or
record.
7.
Yeah.
He still does.
So your
Yep.
son Eric was a 400, just like yourself, ran track and stuff. So tell
Yep.
us a little bit about how he.
Eric was an All-American. He was a Gatorade athlete for the whole region. He ran 10 races, sub 49 races, senior and junior year. And at that time, well, in fact, he still does. I think he might have had the state record beaten last year.
Okay.
A kid from Pierre is really, really good. But he's had that record since 86 and 87. He ran a 48.2. And he still has, of course, the record here at the high school. I think he might have the 800-meter record, too, which he ran a couple times.
Yeah, he was fast because I could never get away from him when he was picking on me. And finally, I got big enough, but it still didn't work out. But,
they were really a treat. In fact, I had Eric. He was a baby when I got drafted. After I graduated from college, January 1970. And at that time, they didn't have a spring and a winter graduation. They just had one in the spring, and you graduated. Well, I graduated from college, and I got a draft notice. In those days, Vietnam was raging, and I got my draft notice about, I don't know, a week after my 26th birthday. And so I called the draft board down in Grand Island, Nebraska. I'm married. I had a child. Eric was a little boy, baby. And I had a college degree and an interview in Alaska for a teaching position. And my mindset was that I wanted at some point in time to be the Nebraska football coach. That was my goal, as far as it seemed. So in 1970, in March of 1970, I was inducted into the U.S. Army. A number of friends took me out that day in downtown and had quite a few cocktails and hauled me to Deadwood and put me on a bus. Went to Rapid City. My dad came out and saw me there in Rapid. Went to Sioux Falls, and I was the oldest guy in the bus, so I got to be the guy to carry all the papers. And so then I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and did all right out there. I was really in good shape and became one of the leaders of our platoon, and was sent to Fort Sam Houston. Well, I'll back up. While I was at Fort Lewis, Washington, college graduate, I aced all the tests. The Army tests weren't very sophisticated.
They weren't going to let you flunk that one. Huh?
No, couldn't flunk. So I aced all that stuff, and I'd been helping John Hansen coach the wrestling team at that time while I was student teaching.
In Spearfish?
In Spearfish, yeah.
Okay.
When Dick Dunwoody was probably about a sophomore, I convinced Clint Johnson that he should wrestle rather than play basketball. He was too short. He became a multi-year state champion wrestler after that.
Sure.
And so anyway, with my good grades and the physicality that I had, they told me, said, pick an MOS, which is a military occupational specialty, of whatever you want, because the Army will give it to you because you've done so well up to this point. And so I looked through their little book and I thought, well, physical therapy that'll be a good deal. It'll keep me off the front lines. You know, I can help people, use my background in physical education, athletic injuries, all of that stuff. And so the Army, in their unlimited wisdom, made me a combat medic. And they sent me to Fort Sam Houston in Texas, where 8 or 9 week school to learn to be a combat medic, how to
really
put Band-Aids on and do all kinds of other things, most of which I knew ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I got, I think it was a 3-week leave. My wife had come, and Eric had come down to Texas to see me. She drove all the way down there with Eric as a little boy. He's eating Cheerios and crawling around the front seat way before seat belts.
Well, and we're talking, I mean, there's probably, the interstate's probably in now.
It's now, but it was all
Yeah.
2-lane highway.
Yeah, that's
It
what I
took her
think
3
about.
days to get there.
When you talk about getting on a bus out of Deadwood, I'm like, and it's not like you're jumping on I-90 and you're having to track through these 2 lanes.
It was crazy. Yeah. So anyway, they had come down there, and then we rode back together, and I went off to Vietnam in September 1970 as a combat medic, and I was totally afraid of not knowing how to take care of somebody that might get hurt.
Yeah.
And it didn't, threw you in the pile.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, it was I was wounded. First time I got wounded in Vietnam was I got to Vietnam September 9th, and October 18th was the first time I got wounded in Vietnam. And it made me so mad. I cussed. I called them terrible names.
Yeah.
Said, you naughty boys. Don't do that to me.
Yeah. No shit. Yeah, that's my dad and uncles and stuff were in the military at that time, and they were drafted, and it was quite a time, boy. I don't know. I'd like to say that I got it in me to handle something like that, but boy, I don't know.
Well, you do. It's surprising. And again, I credit the knowledge that I picked up at Black Hills State University in athletic injuries, in sports, a number of other classes. And I was a little older than most of the guys. I was 26 when I got drafted.
Sure.
There were guys that were 17, so I'm 9 years older.
So when you get drafted and you go, do you stick with that same group through a lot of that stuff, or you just when you hit?
There were quite a few
boom.
guys that had been in my basic training. In fact, we were really lucky. My barracks had 52 men in the barracks. 26 of us were from South Dakota.
Yeah.
And the rest of them were from everywhere else.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, South Dakota ruled. There's no way that anybody else could, compete with what our guys had.
Yeah.
And we had guys from different reservations, different towns, and we were all a brotherhood, period. We knew then that from a little state like we had to stick together. And so we did. And there were some things, that happened in basic training with other outfits, and we turned out pretty well for the whole deal.
Sure. So you're off to Vietnam. When you get back, then Nick, I suppose, is right after that.
Here's what happened. So I'm in Vietnam, and I got wounded 3 different times over there, twice on the same day, and was fortunate enough to receive some pretty good medals. I got the Silver Star, which is the 3rd highest award for gallantry given in America.
Yeah.
But when I came back, Patty had driven to the West Coast. My brother Don was teaching school out in Oregon. And we landed up at Fort Lewis, Washington. And then I took a plane from Fort Lewis, Washington, down to Portland, Oregon. Got off the plane there. Well, I kissed the ground when I first hit the USA. Everybody got off and kissed the tarmac. So got there, and back then there was no TSA, none of that. You could almost walk out onto the apron and meet whoever you're going to. So I stepped in to the airport, and I looked up, and I saw my brother Don, Patty, and she was holding Eric. And of course, he had grown a whole year. He was September. He had been pushing 3 years old at that time.
Just running circles around the car.
Oh my God! I about fainted. Just seeing him was like crazy. Yeah. So made him go over to my brother Don's place. We hang out there a couple of days, and Patty has the car, same car she had taken down to Texas. And so we drove from Oregon back to Selby, South Dakota, which was where she lived, was where her home was, and she was teaching in Mobridge. And then I had another duty assignment coming up. So we are heading east, And we pulled off the highway into Spearfish, and I had this feeling that was like absolutely no other. My skin tingled, the hair stood up back when I had hair, on my arms and everywhere. It just was a unbelievable feeling. And I said to Patty, I said, I am going to live here someday. This is our home. This is my home. Well, we drove through town. There was still a lot of gravel streets around then. We went on back to Selby, where she was from. Hung around for 3 weeks, drove down to Georgia, which was my last duty station there for 5-6 weeks. Totally uneventful. And then came back to South Dakota and moved to Rapid City. And I got a job in Pierre, and we lived there for 4 years. 4 years. And then I said, we're headed back. I'm going to Spearfish. I'm going to go build houses. I'm going to do something. And we have been, Patty said, I don't know, I don't know anybody there. I'll have to get a job. Said, it's going to be good. And
Had she spent much time in Spearfish?
Well, she went to college here.
Oh, she did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she really liked Spearfish, but she was a little reticent about coming back here for a lifetime.
Sure.
Didn't know. She had her college experience, and she taught in Sundance the first year that I'd gone to the Army. And then when I was in Vietnam, she taught in Mobridge, lived with her parents. And so she had some good friends in Pierre. I'd worked for the state government for 4 years. And I said, no, we're going back there. And she's obviously loved it ever since.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's the greatest place on earth.
I would agree with you there.
And so what I tell people, I sometimes will post something about our beautiful town on Facebook, and I'll say it's just an idea. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to come here.
Yeah.
You don't have to move here to see it.
Yeah.
Just trust me.
Yeah. Believe me, the pictures are right. It is beautiful. Yeah. So, that'd be early 70s. I imagine Nick was born. I'm 72, and Nick and I graduated together.
Yep.
So
Nick was born in 73, in February of 73. We lived in Pierre.
And then what was Luke? Luke was...
Then Zach was
Zach
next. He was born in May of 76.
Okay, so I couldn't remember how
much
younger.
And then Luke was born in September of 79.
Yep.
Right after Patty had graduated with her master's degree from University of South Dakota. And she was happy as hell to get back here too. At that time, she knew this is.
Oh yeah, Vermilion. I'd be happy to get out of that. No, just kidding, Vermilion.
Vermilion's okay. But
yeah,
it's okay for somebody else, not okay for me.
I've been going back for the state football here the last couple of years since I've been coaching and stuff, and hadn't been there in a while. Boy, that's a different place than in 1991 when I was running around there a little bit and stuff like that.
The hills. The Queen City, it's Queen City for a reason. All these little mountains around just form a tiara around our community. And it is so true. There is something absolutely magical about Spearfish, our area. I've tried to put my finger on the thing, and it's a whole number of things.
Yeah.
But it's magic.
That's what I always tell people. I'm like, it's everybody that comes to Spearfish, whether it was in the 40s or whether it was last week, they think, I've found a hidden gem nobody knows about. Like, I found this little community that's just tucked in the hills.
Everybody thinks they
they just discovered this, and that tells me that there's something about this place that makes.
I live at the Country Club Village, which is townhouses. There's 64 townhouses there. And there are people that work. Brooks Hanna, for example.
Oh, yeah.
He had a car dealership here. Went on.
Giant pencil.
Took his pencil to Montana.
Yeah.
Was out there and kicked the tumbleweeds from under the cars and built a brand new dealership and was eminently successful. And where did he go? Came back to Spearfish.
Yeah.
We have you're parents lived out there for a while. We have some friends from San Diego. We have friends from that do business in Indonesia. There's people from all over.
Yeah.
And they say, God, I love this place. Exactly.
And
That's why we're here.
people want to come back to town. Case in point, do you know who moved back to town?
Who's that?
Bill Shetler.
Yeah, Bill.
Bill and
yeah,
Dina
Bill,
moved back. He
yeah.
just texted me the other day, and I was like, "That is outstanding."
Yeah, he comes
This
over.
town is better having that guy.
I'm like his second daddy.
Yeah,
I
oh
think.
yeah, I knew that. Absolutely, I
He
knew
comes
that.
over a lot. He and Dina are super
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he said they're living in their place that he used to live in college, and
Yeah,
fixing some
what
stuff
they're
on, so.
they rented a house in town for 2 months, and
Yeah.
he is remodeling the house that his grandfather built out by Margie's, out
Yeah.
in that area by the Valley Corner,
Yeah,
across the
that's-
street
yeah,
to the north, right? By
We
the creek.
will. He will definitely get him on this podcast.
Yeah,
he's
Bill
got
knows
stories.
a lot about this little town.
I would like to have. I should. Well, I could have him. I could have a variety of guys, but I'd like to have a Screaming Elrod's night and get about 5 or 6 of the bartenders over the years, because your brother Don worked out there,
Oh yeah,
and Bill Shetler tells me stories
Yeah.
about that place out there at the mouth of the canyon.
yeah. My brother Don and I and Bill Dunbar.
Yeah.
Bill Dunbar's he's got some health bumps going on right now. Bill Dunbar, my brother Don, myself, and a guy by the name of Mike Skogerbo were the best of friends. We did everything together. We hunted. We got in fights, not with each other, with groups of other people, and we
Sure.
always did well. Bill played football. Mike was a bull rider on the college rodeo team back then, when it was kind of like a club sport. And the 4 of us were bartenders. We bartended out in Beulah and other places.
Sure, Bill.
And we all ended up being U.S. Army veterans. Mike Skogerbo was killed like on his 7th or 8th day in Vietnam.
Oh,
Yep. And it was a tough pill to swallow. Bill had been to Vietnam, got shot in the hand. I was still a civilian at that time when Mike got killed. And so when I got drafted, I was a little unhappy about it, but I thought I'm a payback guy,
yeah.
Sooner or later,
Gave you, yeah.
there's a payback. And so I wanted to go over there and
I can see that word. You don't want.
check it out.
Yep. Try
I'm-
not to
I'm gonna-
make sure that him passing wasn't in vain. So
No,
to speak, or,
no. So I went over there to get some paybacks. Anyway, the 4 of us were inseparable. Well, Bill Dunbar went to the Army, come back. He's from Iowa. He's still here in town.
Oh yeah, I know.
My brother
his
Don
kids
had gone to
are-
Vietnam, and he was coming back, and I was going to school here, and I sent him a letter. I said, you have got to come to Spearfish. Spearfish there's a college here. It's way better than Kearney, and there's more girls. Don liked girls, Don was kind of a,
Yeah.
he was, he did okay. Anyway.
So you guys, you were just saying before you got over here that you were at Don's house.
Yeah, I stopped over there for a little bit. Just
What if we brought that group of guys in here? That would be good.
Would be good.
I
Yeah,
think
Bill's got some health concerns right now.
Yeah.
We're giving him moral support. Don't know what to do medically, but
Yeah.
he's getting the best treatment there is. And all 3 of us have had various forms of cancer from
Yeah.
Agent Orange.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, and it took a long time for the U.S. government to realize that killing all those trees and all the bugs and everything, and
It's killing everything.
was killing everything, including
Yeah.
the people that were hiding in the trees.
Yeah.
Now there's no longer any leaves to hide the North Vietnam,
Yeah.
and their convoys and their little trails. But in the meantime, it raised havoc.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad's talked about that. He's
Yeah,
had a lot of friends
I've
that-
personally been to that dogfight. I've had prostate cancer. I've had bladder cancer. My aortic valve calcified. I had to have a new aortic valve put in.
Jesus, we can't can't put you down. It doesn't sound like.
No. So
It's going to take 2 or 3 bullets, right, to get
gonna,
that done.
gonna take more than that. It's gonna take a lot of them. Like I told a couple of my friends, I'm getting a little hassle in a bar. Doesn't bother me a bit. A couple 100,000 of those little guys couldn't kill me. 2 or 3 of these guys, I don't think are gonna either.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Spearfish sports. Since all of your sons, I played football, basketball with Nick, and soccer growing up. Eric ran track and played.
Yeah.
I think Zach was a wrestler.
He was a wrestler.
Football player.
Yeah, football.
And Luke was a football player and a track guy too.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Can you think of any, like, over the years, some stories, some Spearfish sports athletic stories, like, going to state tournaments? I remember going to state tournaments that we weren't playing in, but you'd go down to like Sioux Falls, and all of the parents would be there also from Spearfish, and we'd all go to the games. And
we used to go to state tournaments. It was a huge social event.
Yeah, big time.
When, for example, when Eric and that class were seniors, I think we got third.
Yeah,
in the basketball tournament. And Chuck Whitlocks used to. They had a big family. They had 5 kids, I think, something like that, and we had 4. And so the Mundt family and the Whitlock family we would always travel to everything together.
Yep.
And just have, it was a great social event. And Spearfish always did well.
Yeah. Chuck's another guy that I want to get on.
Chuck is an amazing guy.
Yeah, he's my neighbor. He
knows more about the old days when they had a softball team. They were state champions for years. Chuck Whitlock was a state champion wrestler.
Yeah, and
a multi-state champion.
I've heard, I don't know if it's true, I guess, but somebody was telling me that he was a state championship wrestler and the point guard on the basketball team.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Played,
really a good and huge booster.
Oh yeah,
very quiet guy. And he is a fun guy to sit around the pool at the Holiday Inn in Sioux Falls until 3 a.m.
and tell stories,
laughing and telling stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a dandy.
Yep, I remember those being big social. Even if Spearfish wasn't in them, it was still a group of people going down to it.
And Spearfish always did pretty well. We've had some state championship football teams. We've had state championship wrestling teams. Scott Russell and those guys.
The Buxtons and those
Buxtons, Mitch McKaylee.
Yeah.
Mitch is an animal.
Oh man, that's what I tell.
In town.
I tell people. I said, now you go up there, and this guy in your little barber up here, he seems all nice and docile, right?
Oh,
he said if they would have done MMA in 1990, 89, that kid
he'd have been a world champ.
Would have been, like.
And
then you go talk to him now, and he's really calm. But back in the day, he was all about it.
He could kick some butt. Mitch is the guy that he is still amazing shape. Randy Coughlin.
Yeah, I just saw Randy.
Randy Coughlin's another guy that'd tear your arm off and slap you in the face with it.
Yeah.
And Mitch was basically the same. Mitch is just he's so quiet, and Mitch plays in some of the Matthews Opera House plays that they put on.
Oh yeah, Mitch is a good guy, good Spearfish guy.
He's a dandy.
I remember walking around delivering papers with the guy when we were little kids.
And he's a huge supporter of veterans.
Yes,
and veterans activities.
He's Navy, right?
Yes, he was. He's the prime moving force for the memorial in the Spearfish Park for all veterans.
Yeah,
not necessarily wounded, not this, not that. Veteran that at some point in their life had a Spearfish address, Spearfish zip code. Whether you went to college here, high school here, came here and worked for a while and left, and you were in the military, he wants your names on the walls there.
Yep, and it's starting to fill. They're starting to fill.
It is really nice. Yeah. They've got quite a few marble walls that are set up. A lot of names.
Well, if Mitch is involved, it won't be half-assed, and it won't be
Mitch
kind of done.
He's a dandy. Yeah. He's a great guy.
Yep. And then guys like Mitch and myself, and there's a handful of us in town that we're very fortunate. We're able to make a living in our hometown.
Exactly.
So many people. I mean, half the doctors now are kids that we went to high school with, but they've found that,
Yeah.
reason or able to get back here and stuff.
The absolute best
Yeah.
emergency room physician in the Black Hills
Yeah. Oh yeah.
is right here.
Yeah.
He's our guy.
Yeah. And I sat next to him on a bus in high school on the way to football games and watched him pound his head on the seat in front of us to get ready for the game. And I'm like, this is the guy.
And Lee Bailey.
They're not, Lee Bailey is who we're talking
Lee
about.
Bailey is the finest emergency room physician
Yeah.
that I've ever been around. I've been there. For me, I've taken people in there, and he is far and away the best guy ever.
Yeah, and we're fortunate as a community to have.
And he's another guy that could have gone in. He could be in Chicago. He could be in L.A. He could be anywhere. But Spearfish has that draw that brought him back after he went to med school, after he did all this other stuff.
Yeah, same with Dr. Bogard.
Same way.
Heather Brewer.
Yes, Heather's my wife's doctor.
Yeah, and she's brought, she brought her whole family back. Those boys, and one of her boys played football for us. And stuff.
And again, it's that. What is that thing? Whatever it is it's good and it's strong because it brings people back.
Yeah.
When I was I built houses when I first got out of the when I came back from Pier, I built houses for quite a few years.
Sure.
That was in the Jimmy Carter era. Interest rates went 18, 19, 20%. And you're borrowing money to build a spec house.
Yeah,
it doesn't work so well.
Bob said when we moved to Spearfish, it was 1978, and we got a loan for $40,000 at 17% interest to build the house, our first house here.
Yep.
So
and
said,
I was building houses
rates
around here.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden it's eating my lunch. So I went into the oil business, and that turned out really well. I can thank Jimmy Carter for chasing me out of the building business.
Yeah.
So I could have gone, in fact, was invited or offered jobs all kinds of places, Texas, Denver, all over the country. But no, I wouldn't uproot my kids to get them out of this environment. I didn't want to uproot Patty to get her out of this environment. And I didn't want to live anywhere else. I mean, I could go someplace, if I need to be Denver, Dallas, whatever, I can go there, get my work done, and get the hell out of town.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's kind of one of the sad things that I've heard lately that's been happening. I was just thinking about up in the hills and stuff is the logging. They really shut that down a lot. And that was a part. I tell people, I said, there's a reason, or one of the reasons I think, like the athletics in the West in our area here kind of had a little bit of a change or a lull or however you want to say it is when Homestake shut down.
Yes.
Because the guys that worked at Homestake raised kids that were
tough
kids, and then also logging has changed. There's not as many tough I don't know how many of my friends' kids or their dads were miners, loggers.
Yep.
And that's an industry that, that's unfortunate because that's a big part of where we're.
It is. It's really gone down.
Every neighborhood I'd grown up, there was logging. The logging trucks with the pickers. At 3 a.m, those things fired up, and guys were going to work.
Yeah, it takes a lot of cojones to go to work at 3, and but you got your family to look after.
Yeah.
And they get up, go while the ground's frozen in the wintertime, in the springtime, and then come out of there. But the battle with the trees boils down to U.S. government policy.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a whole podcast on that. I'm sure we could get into.
And that's not friendly to our logging community.
It isn't, and those are kind of some of the changes that a place like Spearfish is going to have to weather, I guess.
But you're absolutely right about the kids of the people that do that or tough kids. That's like Harding County. Harding County has tough kids.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, they're throwing bales all summer, and then they jump off of a perfectly good horse and wrestle a steer to the ground and do all that stuff for fun. Yeah. So these guys have huge shoulders, arms. They're built well, and they like to compete.
Yep.
And getting a bloody nose, that's like Sunday school.
Yeah.
And our kids are the same way. When we have miners, and you have, as in underground, hardcore gold miners, and you have loggers, and you have people in the hard trades. their kids grow up pretty tough.
And every community had. I mean, Sturgis had there was a
Oh my, yes.
Sturgis, Belfouche, Spearfish, Lee Deadwood. I mean, they were
Yep.
all those communities were full of homestake employees and the homestake had a lot of employees.
They did.
So there was a mix of those kids in with other kids where I just don't know that I think that has something to do.
You know, when you have
with
4 or 5 kids in a group sport, let's say football, you have 5 kids that are just tougher than hell. The other kids are going to feed off that because they want to be like those guys.
Yeah.
And if you have 3 of those guys or 4 of those kids wrestling, the rest of the group wants to be like those guys. They're good influence. And so that's a trickle down thing. When you have a nucleus of tough, hard kids, whether it's basketball, soccer, and the same with the girls.
Oh yeah.
We don't want to let them out. The girls that played softball.
Yeah.
You know, they come from hard stock too, the same way.
Yeah, and I don't want to sit here and make it sound like I'm saying if you weren't in those industries your kids were soft. I was just saying that there's
but
there
that's
was more of those kind of kids sprinkled in.
It's a good nucleus
They played
to
sports,
feed off of.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think the whole society has changed a little bit too, those guys that we always had, there was always 5 or 6 guys on the football team that were, turning wrenches and different things like that. They weren't involved in the off-season training and and they just showed up for football and they just kicked ass and then they went back to,
Yep, exactly right.
And there's so there's good and bad to both of that situation, I guess. But I definitely think the homestake shutting down was a big hit to the athletic. As when I think back to some of the athletes and what their dads did.
Yep. When my boys went to school and played like football, the kids from Lead were tough.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that kid that ended up, he went to North Carolina, was a wrestler.
Yeah, Hardy.
Yeah. He played football. He was a fullback.
Oh yeah, I had to tackle him.
Oh my God.
And he was only a sophomore then, and he was a big kid.
He was a brute.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he wrestled heavyweight in college.
Yeah. I've heard stories, he was down at University of North Carolina when Vince Carter was there.
Right.
And they said next to Vince Carter, he was the second most popular athlete on campus.
I don't doubt it a bit.
Because if you've ever met him, he's just a great guy.
He's really a nice guy, but he was an absolute brute. He had hands the size of a pie pan.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they said he'd show up for parties and he didn't drink, so he'd just show up with a 6-pack of Mountain Dew.
Yep.
And just hang out with everybody and stuff, But Lee Deadwood was full of, and now Lee Deadwood's hardly has enough kids to their school. There's only 70, however many kids in the high school or something crazy like that.
Well, Spearfish has still got big numbers in school, and that'll stay. Although we're getting a lot of older people move into town because it is so nice.
Yeah.
They don't bring their families with them.
If anybody's got any defensive linemen or offensive linemen, kids,
bring your kids.
Please come to town.
You got some snappy kids. We'd love to have them.
Yeah, I could use a few of them. But, all right, man. Well, hey, we've been going here for just a little over an hour. So we'll probably wrap it up, but I'd like to do some more. I think we could do a whole one on the Vietnam War and some of the veteran stuff around here.
I'd come back. I'd like to come back with my brother Don and Bill Dunbar.
Yeah, and get a group in here. I'm able to mic up to 8 guys if we want to. And
those 2 guys, Bill Dunbar was in the 1st Cav, famous from the Idrang Valley. We were soldiers once and young. A story was written about him. My brother Don was I believe it was the 25th Artillery. Don was there a little earlier than the rest of us, and in 1965 and 6, I believe. Okay. And it still has some crazy tales to tell.
You bet.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I'm doing this. Like I said, I've heard not these stories, but over the years I've heard you tell stories, Don, all the guys in town as I hung out as a little kid at the Brass Bowl and listened to everybody talk about. Remember that place?
Oh yeah, Brass Bowl.
Or Bob would take me down to the scoreboard on NFL Sundays to watch football when I was a kid, so I heard all these stories, and now I'm like, this will be something we can do to get them out there. So
well, I think this is a great deal you're doing, Darren.
No, I hope it works out. It's keeps me busy a little bit, and I'm doing a BH one. I do a podcast called the Yellow Jacket Report. I'm going to have Coach Bresky on this week. And,
Good.
And so I'll start having some of the athletes on, and then I'd like to do some of the coaches from the high school and teachers and anybody from Spearfish that has a story they want to tell. Like I told you, everybody that came here, their first day they got here, they're like, I can't believe I found this.
Yep. I mean, I'm not a native.
Blaine,
I was a Nebraska boy, true and true, until that fateful Saturday night in Spearfish. I didn't know one soul. I didn't even know how to spell Spearfish or if it was one word or two. I'm serious.
Yeah.
And now it's in my blood.
I'd like to, Blaine Pummel, he was telling me when he moved to Spearfish, there was 2,000 people here.
I think there were 3,200.
Yeah.
Because the college was about 2,800 at that time. Yeah.
And so have a guy like that's got the Dorset Home Stories and Don worked up there forever. And that's a whole industry in this town. I don't think people realize how big of a deal that facility was.
Yeah.
When it first opened and it grew. And
I have a really good, my wife has a really good friend, Vicky Foley. They were born 3 days apart, lived in Selby, have known each other since they were diapers and off to school and all of that. And we've been friends of Vicky, and she married Don Foley, and they have a house out at the country club. When Don Foley first came to town, he said, I have never seen a town that has people with disabilities just intermingled everywhere.
Yeah.
The Northern Hills Training Center that Fred got going. I mean, the people are people.
Well, that's one of my biggest
so what
memories of town is anytime there was a grand opening or anytime there was a, those guys would all come down and
we used to call them the gang.
Ernie and some of those guys, they'd come to all of our football. I mean, they'd get into our athletics, so you get to know some of those kids.
They would come to our church and they would all sit together. It'd be maybe 20 of them.
Yeah.
And we'd always say the gang's here.
Yeah. Well, and so many of my friends and when I was in college and those that aged group worked at the Northern Hills Training Center.
Of course.
And that was I could talk to a million people that talk about how that shaped big parts of their personality working with those kids and working for that organization.
A lot of areas, people that have disabilities, mental disabilities, challenges here and there are pushed into the shadows or out of the way. Here they're right out in front. Mm-hmm. You take a look at Friday nights in Spearfish when we have our downtown Friday nights. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's another.
And that's another thing about Spearfish. Spearfish is a welcome. They welcomed me after that first night.
Yeah.
But, Spearfish is a very welcoming place.
I liked Friday nights when it was called Crazy Days. Remember that? Remember Crazy?
It's another story, right?
Yeah. All right, Wayne. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
We'll do this again with some more guys and all that fun stuff. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
You bet.